Hey man, how's it going?
Yeah, good man. That's a loaded intro. If ever I've heard one, I
No,
love
it
it.
was loaded intro. It's the first time I've done
Yeah,
it, actually.
yeah, I love it, dude. Let's talk some sense. Gee
Let's
whiz,
talk some sense.
if only we could spread that around to all and sundry. In these crazy times, that would be great.
That would be fantastic.
Yes, because I think that's what we're lacking is a lot of sense
Yeah,
at the
definitely, man.
moment.
Definitely. So, let's start from the start. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing. Where did you grow up?
Man, I grew up in a small mining town called Moranbah in the central North Queensland, or central Queensland, I guess you'd say. Yeah, there was only about like 3,000 people when we got there. It was a really good upbringing, actually. Looking back on it, at the time, you think it sucks because, that's what happens when you're in a small town and there's not a lot to do in your mind. And this is before the invention of the internet and mobile phones and computer games. I think the best thing we had when we moved there in 1980, 81 was an Atari 2600. And that was at the neighbor's house down the road. So I used to sneak down there and play Atari till I was blue in the face, till I had sore hands. And as a 5 or 6 year old, that's cranking, man. But you know what? Looking back on it, we had like creeks and rivers and all that sort of stuff. We used to build cubbies out in the bush and we used to go, throwing rocks at things and all sorts. It was wonderful. It really was the best. And the people that were in that town really were the best. And so I have a motto about life in general. It's the people that make the place. It's not the place. It's the people or the surroundings and the experience that you have. So that, that was really in those very early years, man, was a really good thing to have happen to a little kid. You know what I mean? And also my dad plays bass and he joined the country music band. And that's how I got my start at 5 years old. I just rocked up on the stage and just sort of like went up and said, "Hey, can I sing?" And that's how we started. It's a legendary story because mum lost me.
So you started singing that young?
Yeah, when I was 5, man. So it's to show my age, I've been singing for 41 years this year.
Right.
So there you go.
Wow.
Oh,
That's amazing.
longer than some people have been alive that'll be listening to this. So there
It's
you
longer
go.
than I've been alive, man.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. So describe to me the moment when you first remember music having an impact on you, like
Yeah.
beyond just the video games and the noise in the
Mm,
supermarket and the TV and that
yeah,
sort of stuff.
man.
Um,
Early, very early. I think. My my parents split. So my stepdad was the bass player, but my bio dad, for everyone out there, the first time I remember music having an impact was he played War of the Worlds on an old stereo when I was about 3 years old, and that's sort of around 2 and 3 is when the lights came on for me. I know it happens at different times for everybody, but I remember very, very clearly and still very vividly him putting War of the Worlds on, and it freaked me out, obviously, because it was such an epic rock theater, if you like. But I had this little like toy gun, and you used to pull the trigger, and it had like a flint in steel in there, and it used to spark. And so he, like would turn the lights down, and that was like one of my first memories. And music hit me because, you know, it was written by the guy from the Moody Blues, and he is like, that song, anything coming from Mars, but that sort of that. It's just this epic, and I can still remember it today. And that I think was the first musical experience that made me go, wow, this is something. And I think, and through my life, to be able to explain it properly, it's taking the intangible and turning it into something tangible because it triggers an emotional and biological chemical response in the brain. So, and it's the only thing that I know that does that. It's an
yeah.
invisible thing that affects us so much, and that's why I love music.
And I think that really comes across in your music as well. That sort of theatrical, sort of cinematic kind of sound. That's the sense that I get from it anyway. And turning those ideas into a creation. That's cool, man. So what was your music of choice when you were younger, like around that age and sort of up to your
Yeah.
teenage years?
Well, I think I started listening to well, a lot of country music because that's where I started. Obviously from my parents and being involved in the Moranbah Country Music Club, which was great. There was a great uh, vibe inside the club. A lot of people joined. That we had lots of members. A lot of kids were singing. So I listened to like Don Williams and um, Dan Seals and gee whiz, that Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson, all of those really iconic American artists. Like I didn't get into Slim Dusty or anything. That was a little too country for me. You know what I mean? I kind of liked where it was heading with this crossover, where sort of it had a more popular music sensibility, but still had the country ethic. You know what I mean? Or its roots tied into that. So that's where I started listening to. I ever bought was in 1984, which was Thriller, Michael Jackson. Before that, I got given was it Keep On Dancing at 1982, which was a compilation album. Remember that was the sort of style at the time to
Yeah,
quote
yeah.
Grandpa Simpson. And that had and then I started getting into like Elton John and Billy Joel, and Madonna, like that sort of stuff really started shaping my early formative years for music. But then once I sort of got into my own groove towards sort of my early teens, that's when Guns N' Roses dropped. And I just thought anybody that swore on their song was just the business. I was like, yeah, it's so rebellious, and everybody was well into it.
Yeah.
So then but then I found shortly after that, like I got into the glam sort of rock phase with Motley Crue and Cinderella and everybody else. And I went through that like very briefly through like a real Van Halen phase. But then when I found Iron Maiden into my early to mid teens, that was it. I was sold. It was Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Ozzy Osbourne. And that's what sort of started cultivating that heavier sort of style. And plus Bruce Dickinson, I started to mold my voice more to his sort of style. And that's where that sort of anthemic operatic style came from.
All right. Cool. So was it around that time that you sort of decided that you want to be a musician?
Yeah, I think well, it was in high school really. I think being not, like bullied and picked on and all that sort of stuff it was terrible. Like, and for a young kid, you know what I mean? Because I just wanted to be liked by everybody. And I think I learned very hard and fast that you can't be liked by everybody. And even though you might be slightly different, if you're not part of the norm or the average, if you don't fly under the radar, if you kind of put yourself out there, you'll paint a target on your back, as a lot of us know. And you'll be picked on by those that are still, I mean, their brains are still forming, essentially. They don't
Yeah.
understand why they're picking on you. Some people, do you know what I mean? Or they get off on the cruelty of it, or seeing somebody hurt, which to me still boggles my mind. I still think to myself, I'm like, how can humans do that? How can we hurt other humans? It's mind blowing. And our, and that's a whole nother thing, but the environment around us and animals and all that sort of stuff. Whoops, sorry. But I think yeah, so that's sort of, I wanted to be accepted. And that's why I became a musician, because after my very first, more or less first sort of early practices with the band at school, the bigger, heavier football playing types were like, oh yeah, man, you guys rock. You know what I mean? So instantly that bullying started to subside, and it was then overtaken or surpassed by acceptance by the people that I wanted to not pick on me anymore.
Yeah.
And then girls started noticing me as well. And I was like, oh, I found the holy grail. This is it.
You win. You win.
I've won. That's it. And so then you become accepted, and then you start getting attention from the opposite sex, or people that you're interested in, whatever they may be. And that was very, yeah, it was, I was just like, whoa, it was very intoxicating. And
Yes.
so that's how you cultivate that. And that's why I kept going. And I was like, but then it became about expression. And also I always felt like I was getting a free therapy session almost. It was very cathartic. I was getting out all of this stuff when I was trying to write. And in the early days, man, gee whiz, I was right. Terrible lyrics. But that's how you start. And that's what we can't all be prodigies. And so hard work, you know, I just sat and wrote and wrote and wrote. And people asked me, they said, do you get writer's block? And I'm like, I don't really believe in writer's block, because then I flip it on its head if I get stuck and I write about what I can't write about, because there's always something that you're scared to say. And I believe that's the block. So, and I just poured out on pages and pages. And I think that helped me a lot anyway. But,
Yeah.
and I've always thought though, with that writer's block thing, if you take away its power, then it has none. If you're like, no, I'm not buying into that. I'll write about the fact that I'm having trouble writing.
Yeah.
But then you got to go deeper, because there's obviously something stopping you from being honest with yourself and expressing yourself freely. You know what I mean? And you have to unravel that or address it and attack it. So,
Yeah.
and that's my advice to all people writing lyrics is don't be afraid of yourself, because that's where it comes from. That's usually the roadblock. But
Right.
yeah, so that was that's why I got into music and kind of kept going. And I'm very thankful. Actually, I'm very thankful that I had it, because I don't know where I'd be if I didn't.
Yeah. Don't know where I'd be if you didn't.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of lyrics, did you always find it easy to integrate that into, the music, the style of music that any band was playing? Like, what sort of music were you playing with that initial band that you played with at school?
Yeah, so we just played like, the school dance sort of stuff. I don't know. We never actually got to, we never really got to flesh out our set list. I think we got to play like part of a set. I don't think they really wanted us there, to be honest. I think we were kind of annoyance, but it was, we played Jimmy Barnes and what were those early tracks? Oh, well, Angels, Ever See Your Face Again. That's always very popular at high school dances, because everyone loves to shout the extra part. And we had principals and masters of school, because I went to a boarding school, like flying everywhere going, cut, stop, that kind of vibe. But yeah, so that was that early stuff. And I think that's what everyone was into. That's what most people were listening to at the time. Yeah, and then when I left school and when I went back to Moranbah, I joined like a proper covers band who played like around our area, Claremont and Middlemount and Dysart and places like that. And so our repertoire was huge. There was like 50 or 60 songs on the list, which was amazing. We
It's
played
crazy.
everything. Yeah, it was so good. So I learnt a lot of songs there. And honestly, to think back on it, it was always like, but that, it was always whatever was sort of popular in the area. You know what I mean? It wasn't necessarily what was on commercial radio, because I think people weren't into that as much at the
Mm.
time. It's essentially classic rock. That's what we were playing. Like anything you can think of that's now considered to be classic rock, which is pretty much commercial radio, some commercial radios playlist.
Yeah.
Some Led Zepp, and we'd play The Doors, and we'd play Angels, and when Screaming Jets burst on the scene, we learnt better like in a day, because we had to play it, and Paul Kelly and any of that sort of stuff, man. Seriously, like pretty much it's just classic rock, which
Yeah.
was great, because then that honed all genres, different styles, different pitches, different keys. And so then I got a really good schooling on how to do that sort of stuff, which was great.
That is
So
cool.
all of this is like setting up to where I got to, you know what I mean? So like writing at home, really crappy lyrics, writing 2-chord acoustic songs, because that's all I could play, and trying to sing. And then, because that early stuff we did when I was with Typhoon Barney, which was my first originals band, and which we were playing covers on the side as well. We sort of, the songs are terrible. That EP is terrible. But it just shows you that we can't all be Eddie Van Halen, you know what I mean, to start. So it was good. So we got there, which is great.
Well, you can't start at the top like you were saying before.
Yeah.
So when did the butterfly effect start coming into being?
So Ben and Kurt were at school together in 98, 99, around the end of the 90s. And I think one of them was in another band, and the other one was coming to hang out and watch them. And they had another singer, and they got Mick to play bass, and then they sort of formed the very early version of the Butterfly Effect with Mick Cavendish and Chris, the original singer. And Benny named the band because he was reading a book all about this, like, you know, the code that they'd worked out that predicted someone was going to be assassinated, and they called it the Butterfly Effect. And he saw that name and went, man, that's the name of the band. So in about 99, I think they named it. And then when I found them, or when I met them, was actually through Kim from Dead Letter Circus. So I was living in a share house in New Farm in Brisbane, and this guy rocked up from WA, and he's like, "Oh man, are you into music?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a singer. I do this, do that." And he said, "Oh, I know this guy from WA, Kim, and he's a singer, plays guitar." And I was like, "Oh, cool." He said, "Man, I'll bring him over." And I said, "Absolutely, let's have a party." So we did, and that's how I met him. And he was practicing in a room with Ben and Kurt, and
Right.
like pretty much and Mick and Chris. And he said, "Dude, you should definitely hook up with these dudes. That they could be looking for a singer." And so yeah, we met like a couple of months later. So that was in like early 2000, and then by
Yeah.
August 2000, I was standing in the kitchen at Kim's place in his share house, and we and Benny said, "So do you want to be in the band?" I was like, "Yes, let's go." And that was the beginning.
That's
Right there,
awesome.
August 2000 was more or less the official
Yeah.
sort of start for us. Which I look back on now, and I'm just it's those sliding doors moments. You know what I mean? It's like so serendipitous. If this person hadn't have met this person at this time, and they introduced this person, and if Kim hadn't have come across from WA, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's crazy. And
It's
you know what
nuts.
I'm saying? Like, it's a sequence of events that couldn't happen any other way.
Yeah.
And that's mind blowing to me. And so for that, I'm very thankful also to like Kim, to obviously Ben and Kurt, and to all the people that were the moving parts for this engine to sort of run. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing to hear that, Kim was a part of things with you from the beginning, because obviously
Yeah.
they came on the scene a few years later than the Butterfly Effect, but they had just as big a presence and impact on the whole sort of
Absolutely.
alternative scene.
And so we got to play with them. They were called Ochre at the time, and they were a different outfit then. So we'd been playing with those guys since like 2000. So Kim and Stewie were the two original members that changed over into Dead Letter Circus. And I still remember hearing DLC for the first time when they demoed the EP, and I was blown away. I was just sitting there going, "Holy shit!" I actually looked at the guys and went, "We're not good enough," because the style was so good and so fresh, and I'd never heard like dudes playing 16ths like that, like but doing it so well. And I think hats off to Rob too, the original guitarist, who created an amazing sound. So hats off to those guys. Love them a bit.
Speaking of like new and fresh, when you guys came onto the scene, I mean, you said that it was officially about the year 2000 that things started happening for you. And I remember it was very shortly after that I first heard of you guys. So and I'm in, Southern Sydney. So you guys kind of seemed to explode onto the scene. When did you kind of realize that you were becoming something more than just a few guys in the country and in a band?
Yeah, I think so we recorded the EP in April of 2001, and by November we'd sort of hustled our way to try and get it into the hands and ears of the right people at Triple J, which was very fortunate for us. We're lucky we had Costa Zulio, who was a champion of the band. Mal Bampton, she was still on the radio and sort of was helping us as well and championed us. So they got us onto Oz Music Month at Triple J in 2001, and that's what really kickstarted everything. So there was that. There was a few gigs leading up to it where we'd sort of played to like 20 or 30 people. We were playing at the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Victoria building in Brisbane, the basement. And we're only playing to like 20 or 30 people. And it was mainly like uni nights when they used to do dollar drinks. And that's where we were playing with Ochre, Kim Stewie's other band. And all of a sudden, like the crowd started coming, and people started coming up to us and saying, "Dude, you guys got a sound. We're really loving what you got." Yada yada yada. And we were like, "Oh shit, man, this might actually work," you know.
That's cool.
And so we just started to get this vibe. But it wasn't until the EP came out that things really started to elevate. Not super quickly, but definitely they rapidly, you know, changed.
Mm.
And it was a case of, you know, we're playing to 30 people, then all of a sudden we're playing to 80 people. And then all of a sudden we're like booking our own gigs. Then we get contacted by COG and we're supporting those guys on their support. You know, we're doing this like co-headline all out there. And that's amazing stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And then next minute we're playing in Melbourne and we're talking to this person, and we got the guys from Super Heist, some of the guys from Super Heist come to see us, and we got like this guy and this guy, and people are like, "Oh dude, we're digging what you guys are doing." Then all of a sudden 2002 we get called up and they said, "Do you want to play on Livid with Oasis and Powderfinger?" And we were just like, crazy, what? That's nuts. Yes, of course we'll do that. I still got photos from it. It's incredible. And so then you really realize the you know, there was a lot of work in between that, a lot of work from the beginning. But I think the band had a sound. We had a really interesting presence on stage. It was very energetic. The music was loud and rambunctious. It was very robust. You know what I mean? It was good. It was a time. And I think coming off the back of the 90s, the mid 90s with Deftones and Limp Bizkit and those sort of bands, Seven Dust, it really set us a path that we could walk quite easily. Unfortunately, the music business model changed so dramatically with the proliferation of the internet and things like Napster and, you know, giving away music, which was still, to me, is quite crazy. That changed how we monetized what we were doing. So we had to, like, you know, that's why we toured from one end of the country to the other and back again, because we're just trying to make enough bank to survive, so we could write more, so we could tour more, so we could do another album. But then we got picked up by Roadshow, and they merged with Sony shortly after that, and they pumped some money into the project, and off we went to back into Dave's studio to do Begins Here. So that takes us up to like 2003, which is amazing. So all of that, you know what I mean? It sort of was like steady, steady, steady. And then she went, whoop, like this, you know, and that was the, and I guess that's how it happens for a lot of people. But I still think Dave, our manager, was spot on. He said, if you want to have a career, he said, we're going to do this the hard and the long way. He said, that's the only way you can do it. He said, but you'll survive when other bands will fall apart.
Yeah.
And I've always said it, it's having something to do, having good management, and having at least a tight enough unit that will stick together even through the rigors of touring and writing and that constant just cycle. So yeah, management, I think, usually makes bands fall apart for sure.
Yeah. All right, so we're up to Begins Here. Begins Here was released, and then you guys, you know, just went off, you know.
Yeah.
So getting to the live music sort of side of things, you started playing bigger and bigger shows. Let me ask you, what are three of the most memorable shows in Australia that you can remember playing?
Yeah, so I think winding it back just a little bit was it was the Gold Coast Big Day Out 2002 was one of the best, and we only played the Gold Coast stage. But I said to our friend Liam, who was kind of tour managing, stage teching for us, whatever, I was out the back and I was super nervous and I'm pacing backwards and forwards, and I said, how many people out there, LB? And he looked at me and he just shook his head. He goes, oh, mate, it's not looking good. And he just was geeing me up. And then we walked out on stage and there was like 1,200 people. The tent was almost packed. And the crowd, as soon as I put my foot on the stage, because I had my head down, because I didn't want to see like 20 people out there, the crowd went absolutely bananas and the sound almost deafened us. And we walked out and we started with Black Lung and Bushka, and off we went. And I still remember that day pretty clearly. Another one I think around Begins Here was when we played at the Waterloo. I think it was on the second time around. The first time around we played Perception Twin to start, and everyone just stood there looking at us like that. and it was only about maybe a couple hundred people, which was great. Don't get me wrong. We thought, oh yeah, man, this is awesome. But the next time we toured, like a couple months later, it was almost sold out at nearly 800 people, and everyone sang every single word of Perception Twin because we started with it again. And I just remember going, whoa, it was huge. So
that must
that's
feel
like
pretty good.
it was, yeah, man, that was super memorable because I just thought, I looked at the guys after that first gig and I just said, oh man, what did we do wrong? Like, I think we've stuffed it up. You know what I mean? There's that people hadn't come out, although we'd progressed, you know what I mean? But just, it wasn't like we thought it was going to be. And it wasn't an ego thing. It was just like that expectation. It was like, oh yeah, release an album to critical acclaim, and people were saying, yeah, it's really good. And then, but yeah, the second time things took off. And I think around that time, I think, there's so many memorable gigs, but leading into, there's some stuff we did at the Hi-Fi Bar in Melbourne that was huge. But I think playing Big Day Out 2004 nationally was one of the highlights.
Awesome.
And you can take your pick because we got to, I got to meet Metallica. I got to watch them 6 times. I pretty much met everyone on the Big Day Out, which was incredible. I got to hang out with, with some really cool people. And Rob Trujillo and Lars came and watched us play in Melbourne. And then at the after party, Rob Trujillo walked up behind me, grabbed me like that, and just said, he goes, man, I've worked with some good front man. He goes, you're up there. And I just was like, oh. I think I peed a little bit in my pants at that time.
That sounds like when I met you, man. You did the same thing to me. You just grabbed me in a bear hug and I was like, what the fuck? This is cool.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, dude, everyone gets a cuddle at least once. And so those moments are etched in my mind forever. Some of the most memorable gigs, some of the most fun I've ever had. And we really, we worked super hard. We played super hard. And I think, most bands are like that. We definitely partied as much as we worked. And I guess that's kind of leads into part of the lyrical content or the story behind So Tired. So you know what I mean? Like all of that. Like we just toured relentlessly. We partied relentlessly. You'd get home and I'd sleep for days. I'd just be so knackered and I don't think we understood how much energy you exchange with people when you're out there. You know what I mean? It's not the running around on stage that takes it out of you too, but it's the late nights, the partying, it's the up early, it's in the plane. But it's talking with so many people and interacting. So that was a hard lesson to learn, how to pace yourself properly and not wipe out too early.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Now, speaking of, you were talking about, meeting Metallica and meeting some big names that you idolize and doing shows with them. And what we don't hear about very much in Australia, because we're in our little bubble here, is what it's like for you overseas. Because it would have been around the same time that you started going overseas. Is that right?
Or yeah. That's all. We went over and 2003, 2004 to America. We played the Viper Room and what else did we do? Oh yeah, we did the Tribeca Rock Club. We did some showcase shows. So that was both exhilarating and demoralizing all in the one. It just didn't go very well, and we had high hopes, and but yeah, we really didn't make an impact in America. But Europe later on, we re-diverted and sort of put our focus into Europe, which was great because we got signed up to a label. We produced some CDs over there, reprinted CDs over there for them, and yeah, it was solid. But it's tough to break that market because you're literally going back to the start. You're playing to 50 people, and most of them were like expats. So it's very difficult to crack that market without sufficient radio play. And because they said to us, look, man, we love your band, but you're just in the middle. You're not metal enough to be metal, and you're not prog enough to be in prog. Do you know what I mean? You're kind of this weird. You straddled the in between, and we were like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. It's like, but
Isn't
we're
it?
us. Do you know what I mean? So they said, you're not like, they said, well, who would we put you with if you got a big support over here? We're like, with Tool, with, with Seven Dust, with any of those bands. Like we'd
Mm,
fit perfectly because we're different enough, but still in the heavy rock genre, guitar driven music to be in the same ballpark, to not alienate their crowd. But one thing I must say, it's funny, in 2005 when we supported System of a Down here in Australia, there was somebody took a audio recording of the being in the crowd, and people were heckling us, and we are like, you guys for real? Some guy
yeah.
was like, get off, you suck, oh, you're a wanker, rah, rah. And I was like, isn't it interesting that you're out there doing your thing, and there's people in the crowd screaming obscenities and putting you down from the
Mm,
crowd? I just would never do that. Do you know what I mean?
I
Because I was
know.
like, if the support band comes out and I don't like them, I'd stand there quietly. I'd go get a beer, or I'd talk to someone at the back. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So yeah.
And I
So
mean, I don't know about you, but personally, when I hear something that's different, that sort of makes my ears prick up. Like I love hearing bands like yourself. When the Butterfly Effect, when I first heard your EP, I was just like, I don't know what the fuck this is, but this is awesome.
yeah,
You
right. No,
know?
I appreciate that, man. I think the work that went into that too was like, it was a lot of work. But also like it was different. You know what I mean? Like you're saying, it was really different. It was a unique sound. It was slightly different from what we were getting from America. It had
Mm,
this really, I don't know. I guess it's a very, very Australian thing, because I listen to the bands from here compared to the bands over there, and I can hear the difference in sound,
mm,
which is interesting. So it's kind of like, I find the bands from here are like sledgehammers. Do you know what I mean? It's like, we don't muck around. We'll just smack you in the face, sort of
yeah.
thing. And it's bands like, like us and Carnival and Cog and Dead Letter, you know, and those sort of bands sound very different. We're very unique
Mm,
compared to the American bands. And they're very polished. They're very produced. They got a very definite sound, as opposed to us, which is, we're kind of a little more raw. We're kind of a little more straight up. We're kind of a little more, well, just Aussie, I guess.
mm,
But I always thought that would be an advantage, not a disadvantage, when going overseas. But as we've seen from a lot of Aussie bands, they just can't crack the international markets.
yeah.
And that's really sad, because I think we've got so much to offer. And I think in the heavy genre, in the heavy department, I know a lot of bands lately, or not a lot of bands, but a few bands have cracked the, what would you call it, psychedelic pop rock genre. You know what I mean? Like, they've done it right.
Mm,
I'm talking about like Tame Impala and those sort of bands.
yeah.
And we've offered Gautier, and those sort of guys have done well. Empire of the Sun, and they've cracked it. They've crossed over. But I think they're also offering a very unique but familiar sound.
All right, man. Well, we've been talking for about 40 minutes. Can we keep talking or?
I mean, I've got to go, actually, brother. I've got to go.
All right. No worries, man. Well, thanks so much for an awesome chat. I'm sure we'll have plenty more in the future. We'll call this part 1 of Talking Some Sense with Clint Bogue. But yeah, if anyone wants to check out the new single, So Tired, and the 2019 release, Unbroken, that'll be in the link in the description below. And keep in touch with Sense Music Media. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even Spotify, and you'll definitely be kept up to date with what's going on with the Butterfly Effect. So thanks once again, man. It's been an awesome worries, chatting to you, always is. And
yeah, you too, buddy.
Yeah, take care, man.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy.
Awesome.
See you,
Thanks,
man.
Bye.
Bye.